I'll turn it over to you, Zach.
Very good. Welcome, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed that opening session keynote address as much as I did. That was phenomenal. And now we've got to try to put the pieces together between what we exist in and what we're trying to move towards, and include the previous day's keynote address. The best days of Indian country are ahead of us. They're not behind us. So part of making that all happen is changing the policy in a way that it enables the things that we want to have happen. And with us today, we have our good friend Colby Duren, who we stole from the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative to be our Policy and Government Relations Director. And the reason we were able to comfortably steal him, Erin Parker at Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. Over the last few years, we've had a great opportunity to partner with IFAI, the Shakopee Metawakan Sioux community, some of the other intertribal organizations and nationwide organizations and regional nonprofits to create a movement of an Indian presence in that farm bill as it develops. We had a lot of success in the 2018 farm bill. It's often lauded as a landmark opportunity. And we like to remind people, hey, the real landmark happened back in the early 90s when the IAC was able to get it mentioned the first time. And this has been a continuum of effort enabled by all of you out there that are helping us shape solutions, not just bitch about things. What's important and what's so great about the IAC and the culture around us is that we come up with the solutions after we identify the problem, the barrier, the hurdle, the obstacle. And in the last few years, I've had the good fortune of going around the table and going around the country cussing and banging on the table and articulating those solutions in a very rudimentary way. And then along comes Colby and Erin to write it in a thoughtful policy that makes sense and resonates with congressional delegations. And by virtue of that, we got 64 of these provisions in the last farm bill in 2018. So that's kind of the scope of the conversation that we're going to have today. Dan and Elise, it's good to see you again. Thanks for helping. We'll be able to put questions that you might have about farm bill policy in, and we can hopefully get to some of those towards the end of the presentation. You're all probably thinking, if you'll shut up and get to the smart people, we'll get there. But we'll try to incorporate the questions into our conversation as well as they fit. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to either Colby or Erin. I don't know which one. Colby, maybe? Okay, Colby's going to take it from here. We'll field your questions. We'll try to share your concerns. And just as a short side note, caucus issue reports are still able to be raised. So we've got a form. It's probably in the CVent page. Maybe Dan can share it in the question portal on the CVent. You can go and type your issue and what your proposed solution is. That will come out in our caucus report. And that's really what guides our policy making in the Intertribal Agriculture Council. So I'm going to turn it over to Colby, and we'll be here to answer questions and visit for the better part of an hour.
Thank you very much, Zach. It's great to be with you all in my newer capacity, and excited to build on all the work that we've been able to do together over the last several years, and the work of the IAC and IFAI together in that as well. We're at a very interesting moment in time where I think not only is there a strong focus on food and agriculture policy, but there's also a big focus on how do we end up solving these larger scale issues. We're in a transition in so many different ways, in the congressional, administrative, and others as well. But when we're looking at kind of where things are, every time we are in those moments, is always a moment of not only education, but education action that need to happen. So everything that we're looking to do collectively together is to provide that educational information to lawmakers, but also provide them, as Zach said, with the solutions and the actions that they can put into place that are practical and that work for everybody. So while we're in a presidential transition and congressional transition, let's not forget that we have a farm bill that's still being implemented, and I don't know what percentage they're in implementing those provisions, but I would say it's probably less than 50%. So there's still more to do as they're even starting to develop the 2023 farm bill. So as we kind of go through this, just keep that idea on your radar as well too, of what's there that's not working, that needs to be working and to be implemented in either a brand new way or in a different way as well too. So with that, I just want to turn over to Erin for any, I guess, opening remarks and comments.
Sure. Thank you, Colby, and thank you, Zach. I'm really excited to be here. It's okay that you're still Colby. We miss him very much, but we're glad that we're still able to work with both of you to do the work that we've been doing for the past couple of years in this policy space for Indian country. Here at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, we exist to be a free resource for tribal governments, for Native farmers and ranchers, for fishermen, for food change makers all across Indian country who are working to change the trajectory of food systems in Indian country to empower their communities through agriculture and improve health. We are that resource for you. So please reach out to us anytime. We have an amazing team. We're minus one amazing person, but we're still a really solid team. And we're really excited to continue the work that we've been doing. And I would add to what Colby just said, that it's not just the Farm Bill 2023, obviously that's why we're here, that's the title of the session, but there's still so much to be done administratively. And for me, looking forward, I think one of the exciting things that we have coming to the table now together is looking at how USDA can use the really broad administrative authority that they have to fix the problems that we're seeing without need for legislative action. That doesn't mean that there isn't need for legislative action. There absolutely is, and we're going to get into that today for sure. But also keep in mind, as we're moving through this, that there may be things that USDA could do right now administratively. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we have with the political will maybe to make some of those changes to have some more positive outcomes for Indian country. So thank you, Colby. I'll turn it back over to you. I know we got some cool slides. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just share my screen with this and to kind of go through just some of the different things of kind of just setting where we are with the Farm Bill Coalition, some of the different provisions as well too, and to kind of talk a little bit about the implementation of it as well. So hopefully everyone can see that. So where things are, because of the effort that Zach described in the beginning, that was started by the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community, with IFAI, with IAC, National Congress of American Indians, Intertribal Timber Council, the Native Farm Bill Coalition membership is over 170 tribes, including 79 individual tribes that have passed resolutions and letters of support, and one that has done so in a couple months. So if your tribe hasn't done so or joined, now is definitely the time to do that. And again, completely free to do so and be part of it. There's 15 intertribal organizations that are part of this. And we have 3 allied organizations. Actually, Rural Coalition just joined officially about a month or so ago. So I think that there's been a really strong movement in looking to try to say, how can we all come together and build off of the success of the collective efforts into the next things that we do. And part of that, and I might invite both of you to talk about this, is the 63 provisions that were included in the last Farm Bill, which was an incredible success. And they're broken down by different percentages on here and where they were, but you can get an idea of what the focus was. And the big focus of that was tribal parity and access to funding. Not direct funding, as there wasn't a lot of money in this Farm Bill to be moved around, in the last Farm Bill to be moved around, but looking at trying to, how do we actually provide, ensure that there's actual access and parity to that as well. And so there's just some top line components in here. And I think the biggest one, was the extension of tribal self-governance. So folks are very aware to USDA for the first time. That includes in the Forest Service as well too, in forestry management, but also in the FDIPR program, Erin, which was a huge success, something that the tribal leaders have been asking for quite a long time.
Yes, we got some really good provisions included in the final 2018 Farm Bill that have been a topic of discussion in consultation between USDA and tribal leaders since 2016. But really that work goes back probably almost to the start of the FDIPR program in its current form in 1977. I know we have some non-FDIPR program managers who've been really working and pushing with their tribal leaders to get some positive change made for a really long time. So those were some good things to see.
There's also parity in the conservation title and alternative funding arrangements, which I think we can mention a little bit as maybe still needs some additional support and implementation. Other inclusions, rural development technical assistance office and tribal broadband, additional parity for tribal colleges and universities. Also, as folks know, because it's one of the topics of conversation anytime we bring up the Farm Bill, is the legalization of industrial hemp and specific tribal regular authority to be able to do so. But all of that is across 11 of the 12 titles, and just for full disclosure, the one that's missing is energy, and that's just because of the energy title was probably the slimmest of all of the titles. Like you probably only a couple sheets of phone book paper if people actually know what a phone book is or have seen those in the past couple of years. It's very thin. So talking about some of the implementation parts, I know Erin, in your presentation yesterday, you talked a little bit about kind of where things are in the 638 pilot, but I don't know if we wanted to go into a little bit more detail about where things are going, and how's it looking.
Sure. So as I shared yesterday, I think I check the Federal Register, and I do mean every day, trying to see if USDA has officially opened the process for applications for the FDIPR 638 pilot. I did check again right before this presentation, and still nothing, but I will continue to check every day. And happy to be a pest until that happens and gets open, because if you're not familiar with the FDIPR 638 pilot, what came out of the 2018 Farm Bill was another one of those longstanding issues and pushes, I think, from NAFDIPR as an organization, and also from tribal leadership supporting NAFDIPR, trying to get more recognition of tribal sovereignty in the FDIPR program. And so what came out in the 2018 Farm Bill was a pilot program or demonstration project that would enable tribal governments to enter into self-determination contracts, or 638 contracts, with USDA to do food procurement for the FDIPR food package. This is really significant. I get really excited talking about this because this is the first time this law that was passed in 1975, 638, has ever been applied to USDA. I mean, it happened in two places in the 2018 Farm Bill here, and then as you can see on Colby's slide as well, in the Forest Service, there's also a 638 pilot program there. It does look like the FDIPR pilot is going to go first in terms of implementation. There's been a lot of dialogue and government to government consultation between USDA and tribal leaders, really since even before the Farm Bill was officially signed in 2018. As soon as this kind of made it into legislation, it was definitely a topic of conversation. But once the Farm Bill was passed, tribal leaders have continued to press USDA and work with USDA on crafting the regulations to roll this out in a good way, because this is brand new to USDA. This is something that they've really never worked with before. So there was a lot of dialogue from tribal leaders who have 638 contracts or compacts in other areas, whether it's IHS or some interior programming, who are very intimately familiar with how those contracts and that process work. And they were really giving USDA some very good advice. And they had a lot of priorities that they wanted to see. I do think this very last round, we just got in October the latest draft of what this, I think, is going to look like ultimately for the application process. And it really was pretty responsive. To give USDA some credit, it was pretty responsive to those tribal leaders' requests. It made a lot of the changes that tribal leaders were concerned about. There are some things that are still didn't get everything that tribal leaders asked for, but on the whole, I think it will be a good demonstration project if they would just open the applications. And I do think their request from tribal leaders was they're going to try to do that by the end of the calendar year. Obviously, it's December 9th, and we're still waiting, but we've got some time left in the calendar year, so I'm not giving up on USDA yet. Those funds are only available to be spent until the end of the fiscal year, so we have until 9/30/2021 to spend them. That doesn't mean that a tribe who's selected to participate in this pilot has to spend those funds by 2021. USDA just has to send the money out the door to tribal nations. So we are definitely against the clock right now, but not quite as much for tribes as for USDA. So I know they know the clock is ticking. So we're waiting to see what happens. But I think we're really hopeful this can help get some more traditional foods into the package, some more native produced foods, whether that's fresh fruits and vegetables or traditional foods or other shelf stable foods, whatever tribes want to procure. The idea is that, you know, that's what they're going to be able to do in this package.
And if there are any of those tribes that are watching today, we've been doing a lot of work shifting the focus of our American Indian Foods participants towards a more local, regional, domestic market. And some of you will even be receiving a food box by virtue of your participation here. So remember to touch base with our friends over at the American Indian Foods Department of the IAC. And, you know, we might be able to help you put that food right on the shelf in your particular center.
That's great. Thank you. There's a lot of opportunities with that implementation of that program, and with the American Indian Foods as well too. With some of the forestry 638 pilot, you know, there's an initial agreement signed, so hopefully that will continue along an implementation. Folks might be familiar with the Good Neighbor Authority. There's some tweaking that needs to happen with this to adjust the language to make it actually work specifically for tribes to be reimbursed for timber receipts from Treasury. There's actually a legislative effort to fix that, which is what I would call just a true drafting error in language that happened in the bill. For alternative funding arrangements, NRCS hasn't implemented that specifically yet. I know that's something that is on their radar and that many of us have talked to them about as well too. So I believe that is going to hopefully move forward in the next couple of months. The New Beginnings grants to land grant university support Native students have actually gone out in the first round of all of those are out there too. So that's something that's going to help student access and support at land grant institutions. And that also includes 1994s as well too, and not just state land grants. The broadband programs, which have come under a lot of focus, and there's actually funding proposed in the next round of whatever happens in Congress for relief for broadband. But there was a tribal priority in there. I think the implementation of that has been kind of a little mixed. There was initial tribal priority points included in the first round of those, but tribal priority points then weren't included in the next round. And so that's something as the Reconnect program and other broadband programs go forward and to ensure that there is a strong component of tribal parity within those application processes. And the last one to highlight before I think we move on to talking about some additional components are there was a tribal advisory committee that was included in there. And this was one that when the Farm Bill was signed into law, there was a signing statement done flagging that it could be potentially unconstitutional. I think that you know, we wholeheartedly disagree with that assessment of it, as there is a committee structured exactly like that at the Treasury Department that has tribal leaders sitting and advising the Secretary of Treasury on those issues. So that's something that we're hopeful that will be continuing to move forward at implementation. And I think something that has been starting to move on a little bit over the past 6 or 7 months too. I know, Erin, there's also IFAI has a really good resource as well too about Farm Bill implementation and tracker online. So I put a link in there. I don't know if you wanted to mention a little bit about that as
No,
well.
thank you. And thank you for putting the link in there. Yeah, for anybody who's interested, we do have a Farm Bill tracker. So if you're a super Farm Bill nerd like me, or the people on our staff, and you want to follow along with all of those 63 provisions that are tribal specific and see kind of where they are in the USDA process, the link there will take you directly to our fact sheet. And I believe, I will double check with our communications manager, Whitney Sawney, but I think that we also included this in our virtual booth. We've got a virtual booth here in the trade show, so you can check us out and you can download resources directly from there as well. But yeah, this will take you section by section. If there's something you're particularly interested in, you can Control F is what I usually do and type in what you're looking for, and I'll take you right to the provision.
Great, thank you. And we got a question in the chat about just going a little bit more detail in 638. And Erin, I know you presented pretty in depth on it yesterday. I don't know if you just want to give a couple highlights and overviews of what it is and also what that means.
Sure. So I don't want to go into granular detail, but just from a 30,000-foot view, what 638 Authority does, it's a federal law that acknowledges tribal sovereignty. At its heart, that's what it is. The way that it works, it takes federal dollars and sends them to tribal nations to pick up certain functions and activities and services that the federal government would otherwise be providing. What that does is allow the tribe to tailor those programs that it's being funded through federal dollars with, to shape those programs and tailor them in a way that makes the most sense for the tribal community. So it really is a pretty significant recognition of tribal sovereignty. And I won't get into all the ins and outs of compacts or contracts or what all of that looks like, but at its heart, that really is what it is. It is acknowledging tribal sovereignty, but also acknowledging the trust responsibility that the federal government has to tribes and providing those federal dollars to tribes to be able to tailor their programs in the way that they think is most appropriate.
Exactly. And I happen to have the good fortune of sharing a glass of wine or two with one of the authors of the Self-Determination Act, which was written in the 1970s. And in my imagination, I had conjured up this notion that maybe they had a vision where this just started at Interior and then eventually went on to everywhere in the government. He said, "Oh no, Zach, we weren't that visionary. We just wanted to make sure that we got this in Interior." So kudos to the folks that had the vision to broaden this beyond just Interior, because now it's in HHS. Now it's starting in Department of Agriculture. HUD's got similar things. So again, it comes from input from the folks that are watching. How can we help improve the services that are obligated to be provided to us because we gave up all of this land for the country to grow?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Zach, and thank you, Erin. For disagreement where we go next, there's a presidential transition happening. So I think we just want to go a little bit and talk about that, because I think folks have a lot of questions about what that could mean. Really what's happening now, folks probably hear the term the transition team or the Biden transition folks. And so there are teams of volunteers. You can look it up on their website who's involved in that. Each agency has a team of people that are doing reviews, conversations with stakeholders, developing recommendations that ultimately will be used to help provide some beginning memos and points that will match what the priorities and policy that came out of the campaign was. So they're looking to be able to provide that information to the folks that'll be in the political positions, hitting the ground when they are able to actually physically enter the building with some key ideas in their hands as well, that are going to be vetted by the administration. And as Erin talked about, there's a strong focus on administrative actions. Where we see right now, there's a potential for a 50-50 split in Congress with the two races in Georgia, both occurring in January. So slim margins could mean the potential for either more legislative hangouts or potentially for more legislative agreements. But the idea is looking at administrative actions. So that includes executive orders, presidential memoranda, secretarial orders. Those are the same things that the secretaries of each agency can make directives to the agency as a whole, ways of doing rulemaking or redoing rulemaking, guidances and directives to the agency. And I think another thing to flag is agency funding requests, those reports that they put in to the Office of Management and Budget at the White House and say, our programs need these dollars allocated to ensure that we can operate them. So there's a lot of things that can happen just by focusing on some of the administrative actions. I don't know, Zach and Erin, if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about what maybe some of that could look like.
Yeah, and one thing that I just want to throw out there is we're looking for a couple of producers to share a story tomorrow with the transition team. So we would like to, if you've got a story that kind of resonates with what you hear in the rest of the presentation, reach out to me, Zach at indianag.org, Colby at indianag.org. We'll try to get the details of your story, see if we're able to fit it into the input that the Biden-Harris transition team is looking for. Maybe we can help move that transition along.
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out to us with those stories and information.
Yeah, I would add to, and I love talking about the legislative part of policy, but actually administrative stuff is really what makes my heart sing. So this is my favorite part of this thing to talk about. I think USDA has so much authority to be able to make change. They really, really do. And I am excited to see a new administration come in and continue some of the dialogue that USDA has been having in the food and nutrition service space with tribal leaders. I'm also excited to see what an OTR team and a new administration will do. We've been able to work with the Office of Tribal Relations over the last 4 years to make sure, consultations are still happening and that kind of thing. But there are definitely a broad slate of administrative actions and authorities that a new Office of Tribal Relations in this administration might be able to take. I will say, just for my money, the USDA has the best hands down departmental regulation on tribal consultation in the federal government. And I'm excited to see how that authority can help more dialogue between tribal nations and USDA happen across all of the USDA agencies. I work pretty closely on the FDIPR side of things. That's kind of the world that I know most is the nutrition space, but I think hopefully anybody who does nutrition knows, like, it's when we talk about doing food security work or food assistance work, we also have to think about the people who are growing the food too. And there is so much opportunity for meaningful dialogue and change to be had through some of the administrative opportunities USDA already has in place without any legislative action in agencies like the Farm Services Administration, like NRCS, like AMS, the Ag Marketing Service, or Rural Development. All of those things, those dialogues that we've been having in the FDIPR world between tribal leaders and USDA, sitting in consultation 3 times a year. It's a really good working model, and I would love to see that expand and be institutionalized across the department, because I think what has happened with that is that we've seen positive change come out of it, even legislatively. I don't think those farm bill provisions we talked about with FDIPR would be in existence if it hadn't been for tribal leaders having that government to government dialogue consistently 3 times a year with USDA on FDIPR. So I would love to see that expand. And I think the administrative flexibility is there to do that and get those consultations stood up and identify more ways that USDA can use their administrative power to fix some of the issues that people are having. That's my spiel. I told Zach I was going to bang on the table a little bit this time, and that's my moment. Dialogue, meaningful dialogue.
And as I mentioned, there's a lot of things that can be done administratively. I mean, we talked about the implementation of farm bill programs. There's also, Zach, we've talked a lot about the need for improving communication across USDA, DOI, and other federal agencies. And so there's an opportunity to enter those types of agreements and what they could actually mean for that as well too.
And I see, Colby, you've got in there deferral of principal payments for all federal borrowers, and that's an expansion of what we have been contemplating since this pandemic first started to have its economic impacts on our producers and cast that cloud of uncertainty on what the next production seasons hold. We initially started out saying, hey, anywhere there's federal debt, there should be principal deferral, because that preserves the asset base that's securing the taxpayer investment in that operation. And we've since broadened that, and we think that it should apply to rural development debt. It should apply to SBA debt. It should apply to HUD debt. Anywhere where there are federal dollars deployed as a loan in Indian country and broader, if we just defer the principal payment, continue to make that interest payment, it serves as a zero cost stimulus package. Instead of trying to add to the national debt, why don't we just defer the principal payments? Let those producers, let those utility companies, let those small businesses spend that principal in their community. So that's really a critical one. And you'll recall that we had the hashtag farm ranch help out there before. Check that out. Call your congressman, let them know, hey, there's a solution out there that maybe won't cost the taxpayer an arm and a leg.
That's great. I mean, and again, that's a administrative action that can happen. These are things that are ready-made solutions that you could walk into the department on day one and do. Cross collaboration and being able to do that, leveraging components at Department of the Interior, the localized purchasing with FDIPR and administrative flexibility that Erin's talked about, seating that tribal advisory committee, and also climate change is something that this administration, I think, is one of its top 3 components. How do we integrate climate solutions across all the issue areas and mission areas of the USDA? How can you leverage that through ag finance as well too? These are things that can be looked at and be taken actions on within the first 100 days of the next administration. And there's also the question of who will be leading the department as well too. There's been a lot of news stories that came out yesterday that it looks like it might be former Secretary Vilsack who's going to be appointed to that position. So what does that mean for the leadership components of that as well too? Someone that goes in there with the experience to do that, or could it be potentially, or who would be in that leadership team as well too? So those are all things to look at. So as we kind of go to that, we now have the 2023 Farm Bill, and I think the work may start now, but I think we were started when we were all gathered together 2 years ago, and they passed the bill when we were all at the IAC conference in 2018, and we were already thinking about, before that ink was dry on it, okay, what do we need to do next time? So kind of a little bit of a layout, if there, it really does kind of depend on who's leading it. In the Senate, the chair of Senate Ag Committee, if the Republicans retain control, will be Senator Bozeman from Arkansas, and he's already signaled that they want to start working on the Farm Bill at the beginning of next year. If there ends up being that 50-50 split in the Senate, there's going to be an equal number of both Republican and Democratic members on all the Senate committees. And that's going to make it a little bit interesting for those conversations. For folks that really want to delve into, the last time this happened was 20 years ago in 2020, in 2000 going into 2001. So there is some precedent for this where you had sort of negotiated leadership and power and sort of power sharing at that level. So that might be something to look out for to see what that looks like. The House Ag Committee has a new chair, and that's Representative David Scott from Georgia. So that's going to be a new opportunity to take some additional priorities within the House Ag Committee. There's also looking at, we know that there's a 638 expansion, but expanding tribal 638 self-determination additionally in FDIPR and also into the SNAP program and looking at tribal management of TFAP. I know, Erin, this has been a high-level nutrition priority for quite some time too.
Yes, and it was one that was definitely discussed in the run-up to the 2018 Farm Bill. Ultimately, that didn't end up being included in the final bill, but I think it's definitely something to look at and a priority, especially as we consider not only the priorities that we had back in 2017, looking to this, to the 2018 bill, but also looking at how we fix a lot of the problems that COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted. We know that there's going to need to be a significant push legislatively to do a lot of things differently going forward to help heal our food system and make sure that people are able to make a living and also put food on the table. And I think that taking away or being able to open up that SNAP program and have tribal administration of it would be another way to do some of that as well. So there's that. I would also add in terms of SNAP, like looking at maybe removing the prohibition on using SNAP and FDIPR in the same month might also be another good boost for people being able to make sure that they're putting food on the table right now.
One of the questions that came in specific to the 638 pilot program, is there a website where they could go and find out more, or should they just reach out directly to IFAI and the IAC for that information?
I would definitely say reach out to us at IFAI and also to y'all at IAC too. USDA does not have a standalone website for that right now. We have a couple of fact sheets on our website, and I think also at our virtual booth about this 638 opportunity for IFAI. So please reach out to us, definitely. Would also love to see some dedicated landing sites on USDA's webpage. Once they open up the opportunity, I'm hoping that we'll see one materialize, but there isn't one yet.
Maybe we could make that suggestion to the transition team. I'll start to throw the questions in here so that we can try to get to some of them as we go through the conversation. One is, in the future, do you see a way for the Native Farm Bill efforts to plug in with climate change adaptation to return to indigenous land management and help the most impacted lands? And could carbon crediting and regulation efforts have a place in the 2023 Farm Bill?
Sure. I'm glad to start off on that and invite other folks to jump in too. So I think the answer to the beginning part of that is absolutely yes. I think looking at ways that climate is going to be involved in all of the efforts is something that we're heavily focused on, and I think it's a good time for this too because prior even to the election, there's been several fairly strong bipartisan efforts to address issues of climate change from the congressional level. But there's also so many things that can be done administratively as well too. So I think that we're looking at making sure that one that tribal governments and tribal producers are included in those conversations, and so far I think that that's occurring. But two, how can you actually leverage some of the different practices and components of land protections that can exist to help support this as well. One thing that we've been talking about is a lot of the climate change efforts that I've done before have been so siloed in departments where you're looking at trying to address climate change as climate change. It's not incorporating climate change into credit. It's not incorporating climate change into conservation practices on some levels. It's not doing it from the business aspect. How do you weave that and have that actually be a component of everything our agency does? An example of this is Department of the Interior, and towards the end of the President Obama and Biden administration had a tribal climate change funding mechanism, but it was a great program with limited funding, but it existed in a specific area. How do you take those ideas and tenets and put it into land management? Ideas of purchasing land back. How is that something that can be built into the land buyback program as well too? Carbon crediting is something that is definitely on the table and I think is discussed. I believe that that Secretary Vilsack has talked about this in the past couple of weeks as potential something that might be looking at for this as well too. So I think that is, I don't know, Zach or Erin, if you'll have additional thoughts.
I do, and I would look even beyond. I mean, I know you talked about administrative stuff, and as I said, that's my favorite thing. One of the things that I think USDA could do administratively to facilitate some positive climate change, climate adaptation, is work a little bit better interagency to get more local food purchasing expanded to particularly the commodity food programs. Because if you are moving food smaller distances instead of the way the commodity food programs work now, and by that I mean like FDIPR, CFSP, some of the other programs that are providing direct packages of food. The foods that are sourced by USDA for that come from all over the country, and they go to one of two sites for FDIPR. There's a warehouse in Idaho and another one in Kansas. Everything comes to those two places and then gets trucked back out. So you can imagine all of the fuel that's expended, the emissions that come from like transporting that food everywhere. But there are local purchasing provisions, and I think that administrative flexibilities USDA could be taking advantage of if Food Nutrition Service and Ag Marketing Service could get together in a new administration, figure out how to get more smaller native-owned companies in the door to access those market opportunities, move food in a smaller radius that would put more economic would empower economies. It would move food dollars through tribal communities more, and would also, I think, reduce some emissions. So those are other ways that we can do, as Colby said, and take those climate change principles and move them into other places and other policies. So that I would point that out as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. That really important question. So, we're glad to chat this one thing because it's this is brand new, and it's not something we've kind of planned on talking about, but because of sometimes the nature of congressional action, you have to be adaptable and move. So there is, I'm sure folks are aware, there's been a bipartisan effort to provide a relief act, and there's been numbers thrown around. The very first framework of that has come out. So just wanted to provide that information there. There's still a lot of unknowns regarding timing. The federal budget, I'm sorry, the federal, the spending agreement actually for the federal government ends on Friday. So there has to be at least a week extension of that, which is going to happen. And then there's going to be continued negotiations on this, but just wanted to provide some of the top line funding. Because one, there's funding that tribes receive from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. There's going to be additional funding. I'm not sure the exact number specifically to tribes, that hasn't been released, but there's also going to be extension of time because tribes now currently under law have until December 31st to spend that out. So there was going to be an extension of time for prior funding and additional funding, which is going to provide relief to tribes and states. SBA loans, we know a lot of tribal producers and tribal businesses and ag businesses receive funding from the SBA. There's going to be an additional second round for some of those businesses. CDFIs are getting some additional money. There's also additional money for the FDIPR program and a boost in SNAP. And then specifically at USDA, there's going to be $13 billion for COVID-related impacts to farmers, ranchers, and growers. There's not a specific breakdown of what that looks like yet, but that's the money that's been allocated. And for folks that are fishers, there's $600 million for fishery disaster relief, which includes funding for tribal fisheries as well too. Just
Yeah,
wanted to
that
make
is
sure
just brand new. Thanks, Colby. And one of the things that we're really excited about here at the IAC is having Colby on to be our presence in DC and advocate on a daily basis for our stuff. And advocate is a key word. They tell me I can't lobby, but if I could lobby, what I would do is I would urge all of you to call your congressional delegation and ask them, why in the hell do these get announced as though they're already done? Why is there no process for building these pieces of legislation that has input from the constituents? And that's what we hope to bring through this process, through our caucus process, is harken back to a time when there was input in these things. As they evolved, we didn't just have them dropped on us because a couple of members of Congress got on a call with each other and decided to visit. And then we have to try to figure out how to implement it, because that's the challenge that we're faced with as we implement these ad hoc provisions that are definitely needed. But we could have been talking about how, say, a $13 billion COVID-related farmer and rancher program would be implemented better than it had in the last two rounds. So we got a paraphrased question from CVent. There's some that are asking about the difference between administrative and legislative action, and are there pros and cons within each of those types of federal government action?
I'm glad to start. So there's difference in it, and a lot of it depends on where it goes. I mean, and Erin, feel free to jump in. I mean, Congress makes the laws that are implemented by the federal agencies, and when agencies take administrative action, they're typically doing so based upon what Congress has created statutorily for them to follow. And so that's to say, though, that when an agency is created, like for example the USDA, there's a lot of deference and flexibility to say you are here to. The original intent of USDA was to be the people's department. So you are here to serve the people in rural areas and food and agriculture. So we're going to provide you with the framework to do that. And so when bills get passed, they come as essentially either requirements or directives to agencies to take additional action with hopefully funding, depending on what those actions are to do this. So it depends on what you're looking to be able to do, what the program is, what the support is to do, to try to see if that's something, okay, can USDA do this on its own, or does it require an additional law? I don't know, Erin, if there's more that you wanted to highlight.
No, I think that's a good explanation. I mean, I think a lot of the administrative power really does get, I think, delegated to USDA. So a lot of these things start with Congress. I think what's frustrating to some of us who work with federal agencies is that federal agencies get all this authority delegated, and USDA is such a huge department that sometimes it's like, do you guys know that you have the authority to do this? If there are friends of mine on from USDA, I apologize, but it is a big department. There's a lot of regulations, and there's a lot of authority that USDA already has. So sometimes I think it could be faster to go through an administrative action to get something accomplished if USDA already has that authority that you can point to a regulation and say, like, Congress already said you can do this, you need to do it. And so that can be a better way sometimes to get your goals accomplished. It really does depend on what you're trying to do, though. And I will say, in terms of the trust responsibility and the government to government relationship that tribes have, USDA is a federal agency, and that relationship that need for dialogue between tribal leaders and the federal government really is a powerful, powerful tool. So when I talk about administrative action and why I love it so much is because you can get that dialogue and you can get things done through that dialogue that I find often takes a lot longer within legislative action, just because there are so many more moving parts sometimes. So that's my take on it. Zach, I don't know if you have some more stuff you want to add there.
Yeah, and I think that's the downside, if you will, of legislative action. One, the way that this legislative action seems to happen, all of a sudden, 3 days ago, it's announced that there's an agreement on this bipartisan COVID relief package. There was never any input in it, so you don't know what you're going to get. But so the implementation of that can be more longer term if we're looking for that legislative action. As we start to rebuild a process for thoughtful input, hearings, forming these legislative actions in a way that makes them more easy to implement, like the American Indian Ag Resource Management Act was. It was self-actualizing or self-implementing. And that process lends to a much more affective policymaking. There's a question specifically about the CARES Act funding for Colby. What bill is that likely to be attached to? And will it apply to all funds that have already been distributed to tribes? We'll probably get you an update on that, but I think it's on this bipartisan COVID Relief Act that's being contemplated right now. Colby, you want to chip in on that?
Yeah, so I mentioned that's the extension of the the coronavirus relief funds. With that, it's how they're going to probably pass this bill. If I had to guess right now, they are going to roll this into what they do to pass the full the federal spending at the end of next week. So you're going to see like a large omnibus spending, which does all of the spending bills together, then plus this. And sometimes people come up with different names for those kind of things, and it can be called a cromnibus as well, or other things like that too. So there might be a new name for this, but they're probably going to attach this. So basically they're voting on one bill by the end of next week. For the extension of time for funding, that will apply to the money. If they do include it, and that seems like it's probably one of the top line things that will apply to money that tribes have already received for that. Now, the date of what that extension is, I'm not 100% sure. I know that there is an effort. I know friends that like NOFO, I think I've seen that there's an effort to try to do until expended, but there's most likely going to be probably a date of at least by the end of the next fiscal year, which is end of next September, or potentially a different period of time. But that's what we're looking at for that.
But for those tribal governments out there that are looking to spend that CARES Act money on food and nutrition infrastructure type things, please check out our YouTube curriculum. We've put together some ideas, some concepts about different scales of food and nutrition infrastructure needs. And we're there to guide you through that process and help you meet whatever deadline is thrown at you. The next question is, what do you mean by deployment and enhancements with regard to NRCS? That might go a slide or two back, but.
Oh, yeah, I know what that's referring to. So part of it is looking at ways to try to modernize some of the deployment of NRCS practices, and some that we talked about a few weeks ago, and looking to try to see if you can not only use sort of some of the different mechanisms for measurement, for modernized practices, for kind of changing the mechanisms to get those out and deployed in ways that are a little bit not only just more responsive, but actually meet the specific needs of the producers on the ground.
And another aspect of that too is bringing that local voice to the practices and enhancements that are being deployed. I know our friend used to be over at Whitcack, was able to make a lot of progress in getting Indigenous knowledge into the actual EQIP docket. Question again is, where can smaller local producers find out more info about providing food to these programs? I assume there are regulations around the foods provided to these programs. Yes, there are. Erin, I bet you can field that one.
Yes, there are. And so if you want to be a USDA vendor, basically you have to go through a USDA vendor certification process. There are some more flexible requirements for small businesses, and there are a couple more flexible requirements for native-owned businesses as well that are in the federal acquisition regulations right now. It is still a complicated process to walk through. One of the reasons that we're so excited about the FDIPR 638 process is that that contract to sell those foods is between the tribe and the vendor instead of the vendor and the federal government. So the tribe gets to set the requirements. That doesn't mean that there won't still be a process that you have to go through, but you'd be dealing directly with a tribal government instead of having to go through this big and sometimes costly vendor certification process at USDA. But if you want to know more about that, I'd be happy to get in the weeds on it. You could do a whole separate walkthrough about ag marketing service and the regulations to get into the USDA foods program as a vendor. But we are a resource on that at IFAI. We've got a session at 2. I don't think we're going to be covering those particular materials, but we're doing a preview of some materials and then like educational toolkit that we're launching. So please reach out to me. I think we're going to have some materials on that. And I would also say your IICTA network is a fantastic resource on that as well. And I know Dan, who's our co-host here, has helped walk some folks through that process of becoming a certified vendor. And that's actually one of the reasons we have wild rice in the FDIPR program right now. So thanks to Dan for the help with that. And I would also love to talk with you more about it too.
Another question before we wrap up. We've got just a couple of minutes left before the recording stops, but we can also follow up with you offline. Colby at indianag.org, Zach at indianag.org, Erin Parker at Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. How long is that name that Janie made?
You know that we're lawyers. We have name things. Yeah, it's just esparker@uark.edu, so you can get me there.
Very good. All right. So the question is about Great Lakes fisheries. Last time they were left out of COVID relief. Is there a process that we can help get them included in future COVID relief funds?
So yes, and Great Lakes fishers are included in this language, this framework, I should say. Let me see the language, the framework. They are included, and it's specific in what was released. It does spell out Great Lakes fishers. So good news on that.
Excellent, and great work to our friends in the Great Lakes who made the noise that caused that inclusion. If we don't give feedback on what's working and what's not, they're going to presume everything's hunky-dory. So thank you very much for your help. I see that I'm the host now, so that means that the recording may have, no, we're still going. So we've got a couple minutes. Let's see if that was the last question, is what Elise said. So with that, thank you to Colby. Thank you to Erin. Thanks Elise and Dan for moderating and helping us get the questions. Again, take a look at that caucus submission form. If you've got an issue and a solution, bring it forward. We'll elevate that discussion, get in touch with you, and figure out how we turn that into thoughtful policy that works for Indian country. We look forward to having more conversations about the Farm Bill in 2023, in 2030, in 2035. And our goal is that never does the federal government have a conversation about farm and ag policy without thinking, how would the Indians do it? So that's where we're going to leave off. Thank you guys for your time. We'll see you in the next session.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
I think we're out, folks.
All right. Thanks, Zach. See you later.
Elise, are you stopping the live stream or am I?